two things going on with Trump when he trolls. So he looks around the spectrum of foreign policy challenges, and he has certain things he thinks needs to be addressed. And he knows it's not eccentric, that other people have mentioned it. So I'll give you an example. People for a long time have talked about, since World War II, that Greenland is in North America and it's very important. And the United States needs extra rights there to base. Then he looks at Panama, and he looks back at the treaty that Carter signed, 1979, and it gave primacy for the United States to go through and at a discount rate, and it was supposed to be free of foreign, and he sees China there. So then he looks at Canada, and he says they're under our nuclear umbrella, they're not paying their fair share of the defense, the border is open, and they've got a radical Trudeau. Then he looks at Mexico, and he says they've got $63 billion in remittances that's coming in. It's their largest source of foreign exchange, and yet that comes in from anywhere from 12 to 20 illegal aliens, many of them who are on public assistance that we're subsidizing. It's the largest source of foreign exchange, and yet they let caravans come right through from Guatemala. So he sees all these problems. So then he starts to bring attention to them by being art of the deal outrageous. So instead of saying, we're very worried, if he was a sober and judicious politician, he'd say, I'm very worried about China. There's some ambiguities in the treaty, and this is a concern, and I'm bringing a bipartisan commission. No, he's going to say, China's taken it over. We might have to go in there. I won't rule out the force. Then he'll say, why doesn't Greenland just come join the United States? We'll buy it. Or he'll say, the Gulf of Mexico, why isn't it the Gulf of America? Or then he'll say, Canada, we can make it a 51st state. So that's outrageous, and that gets attention. And then people start to discuss the real problem, because there are real problems there. And then there's another element that it's trolling, because the more you start to talk about it, and you dismiss Trump as the Europeans who is boisterous, divisive, eccentric, you start to look at other realities, and the realities are irony. Take the Gulf of America. So Trump says, it's time to be Gulf of America. How you like that, Mexico? But then you look at the coastline of the Gulf of America is 1,700 miles on the U.S. side, and it's 1,700 miles on the Mexican side. It's been Gulf of Mexico for 400 years. And the left introduced into the popular discourse the idea that there are no names sacrosanct. If you have the Woodrow Wilson Center, change it. The Hollowed Boat Hall, change it. So he's saying, well, they change names. They do it, not me. So I'm just going to change the name. They've had 400 years. It'll be in Gulf of America. We have the same amount. It's fair. And that gets people upset. And then Mexico gets upset. And then suddenly Mexico says, we'll stop that caravan and let's negotiate. And then Panama, he says, well, you think we're an imperial power? You're against imperialism and Yankees? You brought in the Chinese. They're worse imperialists than we are. You're a colony of China. And that gets a further iron. Then he says to the Danish, you're lecturing me, that I'm getting in your internal affairs? You're a little tiny country, and you are a colonial power. You've got this big continent, and you're acting like you're a 19th century colonial. And this is coming from the EU? And you look at Greenland, the distance from New York to Greenland is shorter than from Greenland to Copenhagen. And Greenland's in North America. So it's 19th century, 18th century Europeans coming into North America and colonizing. And I want to let the people of Greenland decide. And the same thing with Canada. He's saying, well, maybe you should defend yourself because, we don't want people to be our colony, and we have all this one-way trade with you. I guess we're a mercantile colonial power where the British learned that colonialism didn't work. So either be part of us or just stop it. Just go your own way and, but if you don't, and you want to have a symmetrical, you better close the border. And you better have reciprocal trade charges, and you better pay up if you want to be a partner. But if you want to be a colonial subject, then keep doing what you want and we'll treat you that way. So there's irony in all of these, but the point of all of them is to bring attention in an eccentric fashion and get something done quickly. This MAGA movement is now incorporating people across the spectrum, whether it's RFK, Tulsi Gabbard, all the way over to Horowitz, Andreessen, David Sachs, Elon Musk, Ramaswamy. So what that means is take taxes for the middle class. So if you say you float the idea that you're going to reduce taxes for veterans, first responders, waitresses, Social Security, you're talking $1 trillion. And then you've got Vivek and Elon saying they want to cut between 1 and 2 trillion, but they can't touch entitlements or defense. So you're down to 30% of the budget, but you're going to cut a trillion. So the theory is that by cutting those taxes and the regular tax cuts, you're going to grow the economy more than 2% GDP, maybe get 3, and then you're going to get another $1 trillion. But again, nobody's ever quite done that. Cut taxes like Reagan did, and then say that you're going to control spending or cut. Reagan didn't do it, so he got deficits, and so did George W. Bush. But last time, he inherited sort of a uneasy world where he had to restore deterrence. Well, this time it's worse. So the MAGA people are going to have to understand that to restore deterrence, so you don't have to even think about getting an option, you're going to have to use force. Sometimes that's going to be an optional. But what's different about Trump is that, like Reagan, he's old, but he has no prerequisites. He has no hierarchies. He has no protocol. So when he was in New York, I used to read stories about why people hated him, because he hung around with Mike Tyson. He hung around with Al Sharpton. He hung around with boxing promoters, King, who was completely disreputable. And when he surrounds himself by Steve Bannon, the way Steve Bannon dresses or looks, or he has no problems with having Fetterman come with his shorts. In other words, it gets him in trouble sometimes, but his attitude is he judges people on what their usefulness is and their ability is. And I think he got that from being a builder. And he got a lot of empathy for people who are not and he's an outsider too. I mean, with the mugshot, you talk to people in Manhattan and you ask them, before Trump was president, was he on the A, B, or C list? And they will tell you the D list. They didn't want to go to dinner with him because he had declared bankruptcies, or he'd been married 3 times, or the way he looked was, and that plays to his advantage, that he does not judge people by the way that traditional Republicans do. He's impressed by Harvard, Yale, and all that, but he's not exclusionary. So he will bring people around him of any background if he finds out they have talent, and that makes him accessible. So when you saw him go into Madison Square Garden right after, I have never seen right before the election a menagerie like that. I mean, he had on the one hand a button-down tie Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House. Then he had apostate RFK and Tulsi Gabbard. Then he had Hulk Hogan. Then he had Kid Rock. Then he had Joe Rogan. Then he had Dana White. Mixed martial arts. They were all there, and they were all getting along with each other, and they all had one thing in common. Nobody cares what we dress like. Nobody cares what we say. Nobody cares where we went to school, but we're all successful, and we have things in common. We all like the country, and Trump knows that. And it's, I don't think that people ever saw that side of him. I'll give you an anecdote. When I was writing the first book, I talked to a lot of people, and I talked to a very important financier in New York, and he said he could see sometimes out his window one of Trump's buildings, and no one knew that Trump was being watched. He didn't know. But he would get out of his car and go shake hands with the cement person, the electricians. There was no advantage other than as a businessman you want to, but he felt comfortable with them. Another person, I asked him about who played golf with him, and he said, yes, he bets on all the time, and sometimes he quote unquote forgets his wallet when the bet is due. But he said, before I got angry, it wasn't very long at all after I had played with him and we were betting on holes and he wouldn't pay up, he would walk over to another group of caddies, Cuban Americans, and he'd come back and he wouldn't say anything. And then he got curious, and so after Trump left, he went over there, and he said he went over and gave us cash to send for our funeral for a family member to be buried. And he said the same thing. Another person said, you know, we went into Mar-a-Lago to eat, and all of a sudden he disappeared in the kitchen. So we didn't know what was going on. And then we found out he went into the kitchen and said, we closed the restaurant, so I have my friends over, and here's $200 for each of you, and lost tips in cash. So he has an empathy with working people. And that's why he couldn't fake that when he was those two iconic moments at McDonald's when that person, that Indian American guy said, I'm just ordinary. And he just out of the blue said, you are not ordinary. And then his wife said, you took a bullet. And Trump just, you know, I think I did. And it was, I guess I did take a bullet for you. And the same thing with the garbage truck. Nobody else could do that. Romney couldn't do it. Obama couldn't do it. It had nothing to do with money. It had everything to do with attitude and ease with working people. And so that's what when I go to Stanford and I talk to people that despise him, which is most people, that is one of their greatest criticisms of it, that they feel that he has diminished the office because he has no he has no regulations, he has no requisites, he has no restrictions on who gets to see him and the people he associates with. And so, and what Trump is saying is, well, I'm sure that all the people who sold out the country with Biden from China and Ukraine and all of his cronies had ties and suits and talked like they were normal. And I'm sure that Jack Smith and all the people who went out after me were all Harvard trained, or I'm sure that Anthony Blinken with his Harvard degrees or Yale degrees who called up and cooked up the 51 intelligence, but I don't do that. I don't care. And that really resonates. So there's a natural ease, and he doesn't judge people by their resumes or their titles or their degrees, and that comes across to his advantage. I'm a little worried about intrinsic paradoxes in the MAGA agenda, and I'll just name two very quickly, or three. So he had this populist tax cutting, and that meant no taxes on military people, no taxes on first responders, no taxes on Social Security, no taxes on tips. You total that up and it could total, in theory, $1 trillion. And then he says that he wants to build up the military and then extend tax cuts and maybe accentuate them. So that is predicated, that's never, so in the history of the American presidency, no president has ever been able to cut taxes and then grow the economy enough because of deregulation to get enough revenue without drastic spending. Reagan failed. He had big deficits because he could not cut. So yes, all those tax promises will work, but only if Elon can cut $2 trillion. I'm not sure he can, because the discretionary spending is only a third of the budget. And when you get on, Arnold Schwarzenegger here in California bragged that he could cut, and when the SEIU and the government employees unions went after him, they destroyed him. I mean, every night there were pictures of him with his cigar and his private jet. Doesn't care about you. The other thing is, and we talked about very in passing, is Jacksonianism is that his foreign policy, no better friend, no worse enemy, no optional military engagements, it's all based on the creation of deterrence. And that means that from time to time he's going to have to use force, and he's going to have to be careful that he doesn't get involved and bogged down somewhere. He's going to pick and choose where he uses force to restore deterrence, and he has to explain to his MAGA base, this is not Iraq, this is not in Afghanistan, this is not nation building. So he's got to be very careful about that. That's another problem that he has. And then in the and we've talked about the most obvious, that as a business person he uses the H-1 visa, but he's got people around him that, unless he can convince them, that have abused that system. Under that statute, it says if you have a bachelor's degree and if you have a skill that there's not enough Americans who possess it, then you can allow people to come in pretty much freely and get almost an entirely renewable each year green card. And what's happened in Silicon Valley is when you have people graduating from Cal State Fresno or Cal State Bakersfield with coding degrees, and they go to Silicon Valley, they're bringing people in from Taiwan, Korea, but especially India, with BAs, and they're not paying them the $150,000 a year, they're paying them $70,000. And they'll, and so they're abusing that system. What it was really what it was envisioned is, we are short engineers at the PhD design level, and yet those countries do not like those PhDs to leave. They want their other people to come. And so he's going to have to tell the tech people, bringing in a lot of people with BAs and paying them almost nothing and having them almost as indentured is at our expense. So if you're going to keep that type of visa, then you're going to have to reflect its original intent, and you're going to cut it down to only people who are really rare, and we don't have enough of them. And that's true. But so the immigration thing is bad. The final thing, and I'll stop, is the reason that the deportations might work in a way that it caused massive resistance in the past is, this time the 12 million people who came were not from Mexico. Usually Mexico was 90%. Now it's about 50%. And so there's not, for 50% of the people from Ukraine or Russia or China or Korea, whatever they are, they don't have a constituency here of expatriates who say, this is racist. So he's going to be able to deport a lot of Venezuelans and Colombians and Guatemalans and Chinese nationals and Middle Easterners and Syrian, and nobody's going to care, because they don't have a community here that's going to say this is Islamophobic, all that. But if he continues that, so he's going to get rid of the people, the 700,000 that are felons, and then he goes down to the next 1.5 million that have already gone through the system. They were already adjudicated, they should not be here. They were ordered to be deported, and they never showed up. And that 1.5 million, there'll be no problem. And then he's going to go into the next iteration, and those are people who are able-bodied, young, on public assistance and not working. No one's going to complain about that. But when he gets down to the 4th or 5th iteration, say 3 or 4 million after he's deported, he's going to get people from Mexico, a lot of them, and they're going to be some elderly, some young, but they're here because they have some kind of familial relationship. And speaking as someone in a community where it's 95% Mexican American or Mexican national or illegal alien, that's going to be a problem, because a lot of those people are not just on welfare, they're working. And so what is he going to do with the people who came here illegally, who deal in cash that hurts the economy, but they're laying cement or they're driving a tractor or they're working in a meat packing plant and they're not on welfare? Because that's his future constituent. I don't know what he's going to do about that, but that's going to come very quickly. The first year of deportations will be no objection, but if he goes down, as he's going to have to, because there's 12 million of them, and then we'll see what happens.